Industry leading, difference making, tomorrow shaping, world changing. These are a few of the adjectives people use to describe the technologies and companies Deloitte works with day in and day out. Join us, and soon those very same adjectives could describe your career too. Explore technology careers at Deloitte.com/techcareers and make an impact on business, technology, and society while engineering your future. At Deloitte.
Think about a bicycle. It takes balance to get where you want to go. Now think about business. Whatever your business or organization, you ride the line between numbers and people. Just like the bike, it takes balance. CLA, CPAs, consultants, and wealth advisors. That's CLA. We'll get you there. Clifton Larson Allen LLP investment advisory services are offered through Clifton Larson Allen Wealth Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.
And once again, welcome to another edition of Blunt Business here on CannabisRadio.com. And really appreciate all of you listening to us. Subscribe to the show. If you haven't done so, please do that over at CannabisRadio.com. You can find us over on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and so many other places. So my next guest, she is armed with a legal background, business marketing degree, and startup industry experience. She brings an unmatched combination of multifaceted knowledge and dedication to the table. And I'm joined with someone who has been a guest on the Chronic Risk podcast from the NCRMA. So I'm joined here on Blunt Business by the CEO of Canna Business Services, Emily Seelman. Emily, thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Like I said, and I know Rocco and the folks at NCRMA had you featured, and there were a lot of different subjects that, to bring you on the Blunt Business, and I wanted to go ahead and get wrapped around because I really could use your expertise on various issues that we have going on. So first of all, let's talk about Canna Business Services. Your company offers unparalleled market expertise and regulatory compliance, providing high-level certainty in an uncertain and high-risk market, specialized industry guides, networks of high-value connections, opportunities, and future-proof solutions. So take us real quickly into the catalog of the compliance services that you provide.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me. This is great. I love this podcast. My team loves this podcast, so we really appreciate this opportunity. Our team is full service. We're woman-owned, predominantly woman-operated as well. We're actually global. So we've serviced clients within our country and in other countries that have cannabis programs. So we offer on the pre-licensure side, as we like to say it, support in applying for licenses in state regulated industries or in countries where there's a regulated cannabis program, all the way through post-licensure, business build-out support, business growth support, all kinds of things. And all of it's focused around compliance and really making sure that you don't get your license suspended or revoked or anything else that could happen in this industry.
So let's go into a couple different things about what's going on when it comes to compliance. Now, recently, California Governor Gavin Newsom reported his newly formed task force eradicated 11,260 illegal cannabis plants and destroyed 5,237 pounds of illegal processed cannabis flower. Retail value up to $15 million. Again, illicit. And led by the Department of Cannabis Control's Law Enforcement Division and California's Department of Fish and Wildlife. The task force conducted an operation in a rural area of Jupiter in Tulum County on October 4th, targeting unlicensed indoor cultivation operations. 9 search warrants were served. We talked about the numbers. They're huge. And Governor Newsom said, quote, that they're taking immediate and aggressive action to stop illegal cannabis and strengthening the burgeoning legal market throughout the state. By shutting down illegal grow sites and applying serious consequences to offenders, we're working to curtail the criminal organizations that are undercutting the regulated cannabis market in California. So when you see that, it's the power of what, the law enforcement can come in and imagine that that's something that happened to a legit business because of compliance. When you look at stories of the illicit market, Emily, as an ongoing issue in each market, talk to me about how the companies you consult express their frustrations while they're investing so much to follow the rules.
It's a great question. And that's a really, really interesting bit of news. I know California is really big on stopping some of the illicit businesses out there. But I think there's a larger issue there on the illicit side. California is so heavily regulated for the legal operators that it can be quite challenging to actually stay in business. And so I think when you see a very high functioning illicit market still occurring in a state, it will always occur in any state where there's a regulated market. But I think where you see the more robust illicit markets or things happening like this that we're seeing in California, it should make us all pause and wonder, hey, is our regulated program working? And not just from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, but what about the red tape that a lot of these businesses that are trying to remain legal or open up legally have to go through? So it can be really challenging. And I know that is definitely one of the biggest frustrations my clients express when they're competing, not only against the legal operators who are heavily funded, they're coming in, they may be multi-state operators that are successfully operating in other states. And then they come into a new state and they've got that backing. And then you've got a mom and pop store just trying to open, but the barriers can be pretty enormous. You're not only talking fees to apply, but you're talking fees once you win a license. You're talking ongoing fees, audits, investigatory audits, impromptu audits, all kinds of things. And then on top of that, in order to remain compliant, you're hiring groups like me to try to help you to meet those roles in the regulations. And so you've got places like California where it can be really, really challenging to get off the ground legally. I think that's definitely one of the biggest frustrations my clients express. And it's not really frustration against the illicit operators. It's frustration against the states, and the states, their commissions or their departments create these programs without really much knowledge about how to successfully get one of these markets off the ground. And so while there should be rules and there should be regulations to protect the health of the user, I think in some instances we're starting to see that there could be over-regulation, and some of these states may tip towards that. So that's a great article you brought up and great bit of news. I think that was like within the week that happened, and that was and that's not the first time that's happened there, and it's not going to be the first time it happens in many other states. But by and large, that's the biggest issue. We're seeing that in New York already. Will this legal market really curb the illicit market? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to find out.
I always think back to CannTrust Holdings and all the issues they had, where I think it was about $12 million worth of product had to be taken. But that's a licensed grower, and to go through, and all the things they had to go through in terms of having to go through a name change and just trying to rebuild the reputation from all the damage that was done.
Yes.
It's those kind of things. It's just the impact of that is, it's like, okay, we're following the rules. We're doing everything right. But that right there, to know that the power that the state of California can have, if anything goes wrong, if people want to go ahead and skirt the amount of investment needed in compliance, it's an example you can use when you need to talk to someone and say, listen, I know you're not going to be like this outlier, but you know what? You have to be concerned because of what can happen if any little thing goes out of line.
Exactly. And we're seeing that in New Jersey. I think a lot of the fees that are associated with the licensing process and the wait times and the cost and expense to obtain a resolution and site control over a property, there's some significant costs in this whole application and post-licensure process. But what I'd like to see the regulators focused on is maybe more than a slap on the wrist for some of these operators who are knowingly and willingly violating regulations and at the detriment of the health of the user. And by example, there was an article recently where there were a few operators that were actually referenced in the articles. And one of the operators was sweeping up overflow cannabis that had fallen on the floor and sweeping that up and jarring it and selling it. And so that is a blatant violation. I'm not sure if there was an error in the SOPs or a lack of oversight or the wrong person employed or someone that should not have remained employed as long as they were, or a lack of training from management. I'm not sure where the chain broke there, but boy, you see that, and then you see the slap of the wrist that they got, and you wonder, there's good people out there that are trying to start ethical businesses and they're competing against these people who are selling, opening up their stores when they're supposed to be selling restricted hours to some medical patients first and then open to adult use, and they're not doing that, and they're getting a slap on the wrist. So why wouldn't they continue doing it? So that's where the frustration, I think, comes in for a lot of groups. And
later on in the show, I'm going to talk about where we've seen that kind of activity, where we've seen certain companies that are doing things where, they're crossing the line of what they're doing, and it needs to be brought out. So there's various compliance issues that we haven't really talked much about on the program. We talk about compliance a lot. And of course, we advocate for the fact that every company out there, you need to be able to go ahead and have whatever standards of compliance, regardless of what the state requires. It's always to be above and beyond whatever compliance standards that are out there. That's what every business has to be in whichever market you're in. And we're going to talk about various issues that also go with compliance. You wouldn't think we have to deal with it, but it's things you need to know. It's things you need to be aware of. I'm here with Emily Seelman, CEO of Canna Business Services here on Blunt Business. We'll be back after a short break.
Rolling into some sponsors, but we'll be right back with more Blunt Business.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
Think about a bicycle. It takes balance to get where you want to go. Now think about business. Whatever your business or organization, you ride the line between numbers and people. Just like the bike, it takes balance. CLA, CPAs, consultants, and wealth advisors. That's CLA. We'll get you there. Clifton Larson Allen LLP investment advisory services are offered through Clifton Larson Allen Wealth Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.
Welcome back. I'm here with Emily Seelman, the CEO of Canna Business Services. And the website, by the way, is cannabusinessservices.com, all one word. And you can find more information with them. And with that said, let's move along to a recent story we all have heard about. And this is from bakingdive.com. I think of the story. We know that about a week ago, as we're recording this program, President Biden had recently announced his executive action to pardon all prior federal offenses of simple possession of marijuana, and encouraging governors to follow suit with state regard to state offenses. Now, I said already on this program, I see this on all accounts as symbolic gesture. The fact that it might be 6,000 plus odd people that might be pardoned. I don't know, we haven't seen anything where that has actually happened, but I feel like, that is a line to throw it out. It's a political thing. I'm not going to delve any more into that. It's an apolitical show at the core of this program, but what is seen, they say, was a major step toward decriminalization. The president also did asking the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Justice Department to review the designation of cannabis as a Schedule I drug. And I know this happened before. And some cannabis banking analysts said descheduling the drug could actually usher in more compliance reporting requirements for banks involved in this space. Now, what can you tell us, Emily, about the obstacles that stem from the banking side for the 700 some odd banks that service the cannabis industry now?
So first of all, I agree with your analysis as far as the gesture being symbolic, largely symbolic. I think by way of background, in order to answer that question, I think it deserves focus on something you just mentioned, which was scheduling cannabis as a Schedule I drug. And just for people who may not know what that means, that by definition means that cannabis was classified as something that not only was a high risk of abuse for people, but there was no accepted medical use. So by definition, a Schedule 1 drug has a high potential of abuse and no accepted medical use, which I'm sure any of us in this industry believes is absolutely bonkers, because there's, of course, accepted medical use for it. But that's significant because descheduling it would remove it from being a Schedule 1 listed drug and move it down potentially to a Schedule 2, Schedule 3, where maybe there's more accepted medical use, but considered a high potential of abuse and all of those things, whatever politically I think works for people who are managing the scheduling. But I think it also warrants a little background. And, I guess it's hard to look at that and hit on the banking without first seeing that all of these issues, this is not new. Using, the plant and getting hyper focused on it, scheduling and the implications of that, when we've seen throughout history, the government has been arbitrarily scheduling or descheduling drugs, using them against people's will to test different things. I mean, it's crazy when you look at the history of it. And that's what really got me into this industry to begin with. And then we see its effect on regulated ancillary businesses like the banking industry. So there are a few banks that obviously within any given state with a regulated program that permit cannabis bank accounts or operating accounts. There are kind of two different types of accounts. There are accounts for companies like mine who may associate with cannabis businesses, but we don't, quote, touch the plant because we're not growing or selling cannabis. And then there are accounts that are for operators who are actually in the field, running cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, labs, things like that. So it is very challenging from a customer's perspective already to open up a bank account. But now this is a great question, because now banks are starting to think, okay, how does this affect us, the descheduling? And at first glance, we think, okay, well, this will allow them to open up and feel more comfortable serving more people, which I do think is the case. But then on the other hand, I do think that this is going to put a lot of pressure on banks to understand where they could be liable. So by example, when you deschedule cannabis, that means more people are going to try to participate in this market, or more banks are going to come online to help operators open up bank accounts. Well, there are really stringent requirements when you're talking about state charter banks or, the banks that you and I may
credit unions. I know that's been also a thing.
Yep, exactly. And so they have an obligation to make sure that their clients are actually, one, operating legally, two, well, before that they actually have their licenses, their state licenses, two, that they're operating legally, three, that they're remaining compliant with bank regulations and rules, or even IRS. I mean, the Code 280E under the IRS is a significant impact on cannabis businesses. And that's essentially that cannabis businesses cannot claim deductions like normal, non-federally illicit businesses can. So all of those things banks have to consider in this process. Now, we've already seen banks that are open to accepting cannabis businesses. In every new state that opens up, you'll see banks pop up that allow it, far and few between. So they're already in, the process of trying to figure out how to navigate this industry. But as you get more groups coming in, you may start to see, especially as the industry matures, maybe that there's some culpability on a bank's part or an attorney's part or an insurance company's part for having these cannabis clients or cannabis operators as clients and maybe not having a role in making sure that they remain compliant. So it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out. I think it's a great thing to consider is how these banks navigate this going forward and how they ensure that their clients are actually not skirting the rules, not violating state law, not trafficking their drugs across state lines while it's federally illegal. You can't do that. So all of those things, you're talking about bankers who have a specialized knowledge that is not in cannabis. And then suddenly they have to understand this industry enough to know how to make sure their clients are remaining compliant and following the SOPs that the state would want them to. It's going to be a really interesting thing to see over the next 5 or 10 years and how this lands.
Agreed. I want to jump into another subject. Now, MJ Biz recently wrote an article titled How Cannabis Companies Can Properly Dispose of Product Waste. And they're talking about how cannabis regulators are concerned that trash cannabis will fall into the wrong hands, and companies are required to go to great lengths to ensure it's unusable when thrown out. So businesses often go as far as mixing old cannabis with standard kitty litter, and others spend thousands of dollars on industrial shredder. Now, one cultivator was quoted as saying that, quote, regardless of disposal method, state agencies will require the waste type, batch ID, and weight of waste to be recorded on paper or electronic manifest, entered into their state's track and trace system, and be available for audit upon request. That's why, obviously, companies will hire a third-party waste disposal service to save them the headache. Another cost accrued on top of everything else. Like it feels like, I would imagine when you talk to companies, there's just an endless amount of cost towards compliance, and their bottom line is continuing to dwindle. So, talk about this end of the compliance and the options available to those who must deal with too much yield.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do agree with you that this is another area where just costs start to stack. So, in most businesses, you just throw away or recycle what you don't want. And here, this is another area where cannabis license holders are required to remain in strict compliance with state rules around waste disposal. Now, the first challenge is that, generally speaking, state regulations don't really provide a lot of detail around what is compliant and what's not.
Right.
So like you mentioned, you have to basically make it unusable. Well, what does that mean? By general definition, and I think a policy that states just kind of blindly adopt because they don't know how to make it any different or any better or really analyze if this works. But generally, that means it has to be at least 51% or more mixed with something that's not cannabis. So like you had mentioned, kitty litter is one. There's a lot of different ways you can mix it, but it just renders it unusable. And so if someone was to try to sneak into your dumpster or something, or your trash cans while you're waiting pickup or haul out services, then they really couldn't do anything with it. That's the thought behind those regulations. So that's the best a state regulator can do, I think, unless they were ever operating before they became a regulator, which is probably not going to happen. So now you've got an operator who is looking at very broad regulations that don't have a lot of detail around how to remain compliant. And then the operator needs to develop SOPs around not only waste disposal, but before that, quarantining the products based on why they're getting disposed of. Are they expired? Do they have mold or mildew? Are they contaminated in some other way? Are they returned product? Expired product versus contaminated product, they're going to be quarantined a little bit differently, or maybe written in your log, your waste disposal log differently. So you're developing SOPs around this, and then around not only quarantine and storage, but also your security, your cameras, what the process is for the agents who can manage that waste, and all of those things. So our firm is often used to develop these types of SOPs around those techniques. And whether it's cultivator or retailer dealing with, whether it's cultivator disposing of yield or excess yield, like you had mentioned, or retailers who are trying to dispose of a product or a cartridge or a recalled item, those SOPs are very important. And keeping detailed records is also important. So you're going to track everything from the agent working on it to the date and time that it's disposed, the reason, all of those things have to be tracked. And I think there's an accountability there, and then like you said, outsourcing it to a third party adds an extra cost. I think as the industry matures, we'll see some maybe more creative ways and cheaper ways to dispose of it that states are okay with. For now, it's definitely going to be one of those costly areas.
And you think about the fact that you can't burn it. You can't just dispose, like throw it into a dumpster. You're worried about if it does get into anybody else's hand, because it's just not the easiest way when you get to where you are and then you yield so much and then you just can't do anything about it and that's expired. And for something that you're never going to use, that you have to get rid of, that you have to treat it so detailed and so carefully as if it were new. And, it's disposed. It's like you're losing it. But you still have to go through all this red tape and the cost of doing it as well. Like, it's just, I don't think, other mainstream companies or industries, they don't have to worry about this kind of thing. But this is like another obstacle that where we're still awaiting legalization federally. And this is something here where I don't know if there's something can be done here where this is going to be addressed because it's a cost that I don't think anybody talks about, but they probably have to go and deal with it. And it's like, you have to kind of overproduce to make sure you always have product and inventory and what you can do. And right now you can't export it. So you have nothing to do but let it expire. And then you have to dispose of it properly and document it and log it and catalog. It's mind boggling.
It really is. And this is the result of treating a plant like it's this hazardous material. Yeah. It exposes the lunacy, I think, of what a Schedule 1 classification results in.
Agreed. Let's go into another thing. We're going to go into one more break. And when we come back, I mentioned earlier about how we're seeing retailers that are doing things where, there's third-party outlets now selling product. And that's what's going on in Canada. We're going to report about that. And I want to get your take on it. I'm here again with Emily Seelman, the CEO of Canna Business Services. Website is Canna, CANNA, businessservices.com, one word. Take a look at that while we go to break.
Rolling into some sponsors, but we'll be right back with more Blunt Business.
I'm back with final questions with Emily Seelman, CEO of Canna Business Services here on Blunt Business. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario is also responsible for cannabis shops. We're talking about Canada, by the way. They warn licensed retailers against selling their inventory to quote unquote unlicensed third parties upon the closure of the store, reporting MJ Biz Daily. The warning came, quote, in response to an offer from a company called Leafy Things Canada to buy struggling stores' cannabis inventory, end quote. So, Emily, should U.S. companies be concerned? Because, once legalization comes in, well, I don't know if this has happened on a state issue so far, but should we be concerned about these kinds of extreme measures where companies might look as a last resort to unload extra inventory and that's not being documented?
I definitely think so. I think it's a mistake to believe that that's not already happening in more facilities outside of the one that was reported by the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, and that it's not happening already here. There are and have been instances where operators, this actually goes back to your prior question about waste disposal and the SOPs around that. You've got operators who may be taking on too much inventory and not really able to or thoughtfully tracking the inventory quantity that they should have, whether that's a cultivator growing or a retailer or dispenser stocking their shelves. There is an ongoing question around how much inventory should we have. We don't want to run out, but we don't want the products to expire because then we have to dispose of them. And I think what we've seen and what we will continue to see is extreme measures like this for operators who want to lessen the cost of the disposal of that excess inventory. And I recall that happening, I believe it was back in 2019 in Pennsylvania. And that's where I kind of cut my teeth in the cannabis industry back then, 2016, 17. And it was around 2019 when an operator had got shut down, I believe, or at least fined. I believe they were shut down, but I could be incorrect there. But I recall the instance where they had their cameras kind of mysteriously shut off. And it was right around the same time where their waste suddenly disappeared. And I think you're going to see more and more instances of that where you can maybe make a correlation between, okay, well, if your camera is suddenly somehow shut off when all operators are supposed to have at least 4-hour minimum backup, that's the general rule across states. And then you've got waste that suddenly disappears when you're supposed to have redundancy in your SOPs around this. And you're supposed to have, maybe a monitoring agent or employee, and then, or maybe 1 or 2 employees at minimum, handling that waste. So how does all of this go missing and how does all of it happen? And I think it's exactly what you had just described in Ontario. I think people are trying to figure out ways to tap in maybe to both the legal and the illicit market, and maybe utilizing the illicit market as a way to curb some of the costs that are being incurred on the legal side because of all the regulation. So it's a pretty unfortunate thing. I think it's something that regulators are going to have to become a little bit smarter about, and how to maybe have some more extreme measures and use some people as cautionary tales around why you shouldn't risk it. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as the market matures for sure. But Ontario is definitely an example. It's one that they're ahead of us in their maturity of the program. So it's a great place to look at to say, okay, this is what we're going to be seeing more of in the future in the United States.
Exactly. And these are all the different factors we have to go and worry about. And for those, hopefully we put a call to action out there that you need to go ahead and find out and be aware of all these different issues within your space. If you're a business owner, cultivator, and you need someone like, what Emily's offering right here with Cannabis Services. Let's go ahead and quickly tell people about the website again, cannabusinessservices.com. You're offering consulting, business application, permit services, marketing, and post-licensure business build-out support. So real quickly, to really quickly summarize what you're able to go and how you might be able to go and answer some of these issues that we talked about today and what they should do to work.
Absolutely. Well, I think in these situations that we just discussed today, I think the usual first step in with our clients here is to make an analysis of where they're at right now in their business, understand their SOPs, do a review of what they've got written, what's probably in their head, and they just have a process mentally that they don't actually have in writing, and then really trying to work through those SOPs to make them ironclad, to come up with redundancy, to come up with better management policies, maybe even down to the organizational structure of the company. Because not only does this help with remaining compliant, but this affects your bottom line. And I think that was something you kept coming to in all of these articles you were referencing and the questions you were asking is all of these things affect your bottom line. And at the end of the day, a business is trying to not only just survive and stay in business, but become profitable and feed their families. The business owners want to succeed here, and our job is to help you succeed. So whether that's on the business build out support or regulatory compliance, understanding and reworking, redrafting your SOPs, or helping you through an audit or anticipating an investigatory review of a certain process, or even on the business side and really actually growing it in a sustainable way. We support people all along that process. It looks a little different for different people, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what are your practices? What are you doing every single day? Because what you do every single day is what is ultimately going to impact your bottom line and your outcome. So if it's in writing, but you're not following it, it doesn't count. And if it's in your head, it doesn't count. So what's on paper? What are you following? What are your SOPs? What is your structure? And you do that every day. It's pretty objective and it points directly to how you'll succeed or how you'll fail.
Wonderful. So thank you, Emily, for being on with us again. CEO Emily Seelman, CEO of Canna Business Services here on Blunt Business. Thanks for being on and thanks for, sharing your insight on all these different initiatives.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you, listeners, for listening to another Blunt Business. We'll talk to you next time. The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.
O'Reilly. This is Claudia's O'Reilly Auto Parts story.
I had just moved to a new city and barely even knew where the grocery store was yet. When my car wouldn't start one morning, I didn't know who to ask about local shops. But I remembered a name from back home, O'Reilly Auto Parts. I called and they pointed me to a great mechanic just down the street. Now I feel a little more at home.
O'Reilly Auto Parts. Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
Urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
it's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.